We are back inside the Soul Line Network private podcast. I'm your host, Chris Madrigal, and today we have the Human Resonator Coach, Libby Tedder Hugus. And she is also one of our guest experts inside this community. And I'm just so excited to have you, Libby, not just inside the community, but really dive into this conversation today because I love the topic that we're going to tap into, which is mental fitness and flexibility in action. And I really
Mhm.
can't wait to dive into all that. But I want to just really welcome you here, welcome you to the podcast, welcome you to the community, and say thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. It is a joy to be a part of the Soul Aligned Network, and of course, to have the opportunity to share person to person through the magic of the interwebs and podcasting space a little bit more about the good magic, the good medicine that I bring into the world.
I love it. And just so before we get started and get into all that goodness, I always like to ask our guests, what is it that got you into the work that you do today? Because I know there's always a beautiful story that
Mm,
leads you there.
of course, of course. Those why stories really tell us a lot, don't they, about the passions that we have. So it was late 2020, and I was in a training course to professionalize my coaching work, which at the time was just a side gig to the work I was doing in full-time nonprofit world. And I was in a really incredible training that year. And of course, in the same way that the world was sort of turned upside down that year, that big before and after that we all experienced with the global pandemic. In my own brain, in my own body, in my own world, everything was upside down because of the challenge of the pandemic. But also, I had birthed my second child that year, and I had had an incredibly dark postpartum,
Mm.
just very low, scary time inside of my brain and inside of my body. And a friend of mine that was in the training program for professionalizing my coaching work said, "Hey, I found this program called Positive Intelligence, and they're giving away grants to coaches to come participate in their 6 week program. I think you would really dig this." And I was like, free learning, sign me up, of course. Looked into the program and sort of immediately had one of those like zinging moments, right? Where you're just like, there's a magnet here that I want to follow that trace. When I got into the program, Chris, which was the PQ training program, beginning to understand my brain, it was like a 180 relationship to understanding my own brain in a completely different way. And the biggest thing that motivated me to step into mental fitness coaching from that experience of being trained in positive intelligence was realizing that I could opt out of my own bully brain. And by
Mhm.
that, I mean the voices in my brain that were convincing me I needed to play small. I wasn't good enough. I wasn't brave enough. I didn't know enough in order to be the person that I wanted to be in the world. And when I learned how to opt out of those voices, I was like, this is the magic. This is the secret sauce. And so, a couple of years later, after going through that program, the nonprofit that I was leading really came to a close. And the natural next step was to go into business for myself, with myself, to allow others access to this exact same transformation, this exact same light bulb moment.
Yeah, I love that. Because there's so much to, well, there's so much to the function of our brain and how we can actually control it ourselves. We just don't know how.
Yeah.
Now, I know you talk about, bringing in neurobiology and
Mhm.
mental fitness to help people. Tell
Mhm.
me a little bit more about that neurobiology piece. I know it's huge, but just in a way that people here could understand.
Of course. Yeah. So, the shortest version, I think, to really grounding ourselves in how neuroscience um, works is to understand that we sort of have two major regions in our physical brain that then translate into those three intelligence centers of thoughts, emotions, and intuition. So, in those two major regions, we have easy to remember survival brain and thrive brain. Now, survival brain is magical. It is the very powerful basic instincts in our animal bodies that keep us moving in the world, that keep us safe, that help us detect when threats are on the horizon, that help us keep on alert when we're not physically safe, emotionally safe, or biologically safe. And so, neuroscience then is the study of how we're wired and how we react. So, as a mental fitness coach, what I love doing is I love using simple analogies and language for people to begin to create some distance between their own survival brain and their thrive brain so that they can opt out of being stuck in survival brain and opt into thrive brain, higher thinking brain, creative brain, possibilities brain, love brain, the brain that says, ah, we're safe here, we have what we need, and there's possibilities of moving forward.
Love that. Thank you so much for sharing that because I'm not an expert by any means, but I started to study, the neuroscience and the brain part years
Mm-hmm.
ago. I didn't quite dive
Mm-hmm.
into it. It's a complex thing. So I
Mm-hmm.
love that you bring the simplicity to it. But for me, I started studying it. I have identical twin daughters who were born with a genetic condition called 22q deletion syndrome. And so it affects, over 180 different ways in the body. But one of the things that we were always told is that it could impact, there was a lot of developmental delays, but just learning pieces of it. So I started to
Mm-hmm.
dive into that, and it was complex. So when you are saying, I bring this in and I'm going to teach you in a way that you're going to understand, I love that because there's so much and to be able to understand how our brain operates, but a lot of people get discouraged with the language
Of
in itself.
course. Yeah. Yeah. So that's exactly it. We don't have to be neuroscientists to have an instinctual understanding of when our brain goes into survival fear brain and when our brain emerges into thrive functioning brain. We don't have to be a neuroscientist to understand that. We get that in our own bodies. We can feel that.
Yeah. It's just a matter, would you say that it's a matter of recognizing it in yourself?
Mm, mm. Yeah. I think it's a combination of recognizing and intercepting. So there's these three muscles that I coach folks through, muscles being an analogy, not a physical reality in the brain, of interceptor muscle, self command muscle, and self lead muscle. So when we begin to recognize the patterns and the voices and the typical ways that those neural pathways are taking us into fear brain. They're taking us into well worn versions of self defense, self protection modes. When we can recognize those voices, then we have the ability to pause and choose a different path, right? In mental fitness work, we're constantly working on building out the muscle memory of not only recognizing, but pausing and shifting out of what we've begun to recognize. So let me give a quick concrete example of that, and let's see if that helps us recognize this. So in the positive intelligence research developed by this brilliant human being named Shirzad Shamin, he's my mentor in the program. Um, he really found through factor analysis these nine archetypal saboteurs in the brain, patterns that we fall into when we're in survival mode. And then there's a 10th sort of universal one called the judge. Psychology sometimes calls this the inner critic, or imposter syndrome, but we all know what that inner judge's voice sounds like. It sounds different for every single one of us, but we've all got one. And then with the archetypes, with the 9 archetypes, then the saboteurs, an example would be pleaser. Okay. So if my pleaser, which is high on my sort of assessment list, if it is coming from survival brain, then the lies that it's trying to tell me are you're not lovable until everybody around you is loved. Your needs need to be the very last on the list because if everybody's needs around you are not met, you're not worthy of having your needs met. So that's what the survival version of pleaser does. But here's what's powerful about recognizing that particular voice in my brain, Chris. Um, Behind the over cranked, over functioning version of pleaser is a natural underlying strength. And for pleaser, the natural underlying strength is empathy. So if I approach a scenario with boundaried empathy, and I am coming from my sage brain, my love brain, then I'm going to be able to come in and discern. Instinctually, my survival brain says, compulsively meet that need. My love brain, my sage brain says, pause, discern whether or not fill in the blank human being that I'm trying to help needs or wants my help. And then once they've consented to needing my help, then I can step in from my own empathetic place rather than that loosey goosey version of it. So that's a little bit about how to recognize those patterns.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that. Now, let's talk a little bit about mental fitness and why it matters so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Hmm. Mental fitness matters because it is the development of choice in our brain to respond from that higher thinking green battery versus to respond from that lower thinking reactive red battery brain. Okay. So mental fitness is just creating more and more muscle memory to choose to respond rather than react. That's the simplest way to talk about what it is. And the reason why it matters is because if we do not practice the pause in relationship to our own brain, we will be actively sabotaged the majority of our day. If we're not actively counteracting survival brain will win. So when we practice that muscle memory of pause and the choice that we've been given to respond out of response brain, we're better for it. Our relationships are better for it. Our physical well-being is better for it. And how we show up, in like, there's sort of a sterile word called performance, but like how we perform throughout the day, whether that's like in our homes, in our jobs, socially, etc. That's where the power of mental fitness comes in.
Yeah. Now, you're talking about that muscle memory and that pause. Would you
Mhm.
say that as people develop that and, using the analogy of a muscle, it gets
Mhm.
stronger, it becomes easier to just intercept and
Mm,
um, I want to say more like an easier, I don't know that that's the right word that I want to use here, but I hope I'm making sense. I mean, as you build this mental muscle,
yeah,
does this process become easier to quiet that inner critic, if you will?
yeah, absolutely. So, um, because I've been practicing this version of mental fitness since I joined the program in January of 2021. So I learned about it in late 2020, dove in 2021. So where does that put us? 5 years into practicing. It does get easier. Now, I want to say that being a human on planet Earth at any time, and especially right now, is very, very challenging. So the practice of mental fitness gets easier. The challenges around us do not. So our response time the recovery time between hitting the hot stove of a negative emotion and being able to remove our hand from getting burned by that negative emotion, that gets simpler. But the negative stimuli are going to be everywhere all the time, right? That's just life on planet Earth.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, there was one other thing that popped into my brain. Let me see if I can get it about getting easier. Oh, so do you know that feeling when you approach a door that's a push-pull door and you're super familiar with that door, but after about 30 seconds, you look down at the door and you realize that it says pull, not push. So you've been pushing against the wrong direction, right? And you're
Yeah.
like, oh, duh, this is a pull door. And then you pull, and it's so much easier to cross the threshold, right? So mental fitness is a little bit like um, easing that tug of war between our survival and thrive brains for ourselves. Because when we approach whichever door, metaphorical or real, that we need to cross throughout our day, we're that much more conscious and present to what the door says rather than on autopilot. So we're just trying to create the opportunity to get off of autopilot in our own brains so that we're conscious and present to the most efficient way to move through that threshold, that door.
Yeah. As you're talking, it kind of reminds me of an experience that I had. And this is when I was pregnant with my daughters. So when I was pregnant, that's when I learned of this diagnosis that they had. And it went over a course of just, doctor visits after doctor visits. And it's like, first it was a heart defect, then it was, something with their kidneys. And it was, and it just kept going. And I remember being told by a pediatrician, which was my husband's brother-in-law, there is nothing you can do at this moment. Like the dot your babies are developing. It's out of your control. The only thing you can control is your mind. So
Mm.
you need to be in control of your mind. And
Wow.
so I made it kind of like my mission to really be in control of my mind because I suffered
Yeah.
from anxiety big time, my teenage years leading up to that. So it really became a mental game, if you will,
Yes.
where it's
Yes.
like every time these scary thoughts would come in and all the unknowns would pop in, I had to stop myself. Kind of, it reminded me when you're saying like intercept, I had to like
Mhm.
intercept my thoughts and remind myself that if I did not control them, then I could then be impacting negativity, impacting
Yes.
them negatively. So
Mhm.
that was kind of my incentive of like, there's already a lot going on that
Mm.
I have
Yes.
zero control over. If there's
Yes.
one thing I can control, it's my thoughts. And I refer it as it was a mental game. And
Yeah.
honestly, a game obviously that lasted my entire pregnancy, but at the end, it actually helped me with my anxiety as a whole because it allowed me to then intercept thoughts. Now, post delivery, I mean, I went into survival mode big time because it was extremely overwhelming and all the different things. But then you
Yes.
hit a point, I hit a point, several years down the line where it's like, time out. We need to start over. And, that's actually what got me into coaching and, mindset coaching and all that. But as you were describing it, it really took me to the time when I was pregnant, really, because that's when I was very intentional about intercepting negative thoughts. And
Mm.
it was almost like every time we'd go to the doctor and something not positive in my eyes was said to us, one thing or the other, I would give myself 72 hours to process, cry, whatever you need, get all those feelings out of your system,
Yeah.
lock it in and go.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
I mean, looking back, I'm not really sure how I did all that, but there was that motivating factor.
Yes. Oh my goodness, this story is the most beautiful example of everything that's core to mental fitness. And what's coming to mind for me there is, like you said, gamifying it and not over identifying with the harsh or tricky or anxiety producing thoughts. That's exactly it. So, sort of one of my, core beliefs and experiences in the world is that we were made from love to be loved, to give love away. Like we are inherently good, magical beings. We are loved. We are so good. And that survival brain can really dampen that reality. And so the more we give ourselves the opportunity to gamify it and not over identify with whatever anxious or negative or hard thought is coming our way, the more we can identify with the true core, the love core, the well core, the good core that makes up our being, right? So I love that is the example that came into your brain, because that's exactly what I do.
I love that. And mind you, this is something that came to me of how to process that time, not because I knew anything. Now you're putting this
Yeah,
name to it, and over time I've learned, right? But in
yeah,
that moment, it was about my daughters, and it was about
yes,
keeping them safe. And
yes,
I felt like that was the only thing that I could do. So there
yeah,
was no moments, I like what you just mentioned right now. There was no moments of, why is this happening to me? What did I
mhm,
do to those thoughts never crossed my mind. It was
yeah,
unlocking the sin, and we were always, my husband and I, thinking the positive outcome, right?
yep,
Despite
yep,
everything that they were telling us. So I was being very intentional to not pay attention to any outside influence that could change my way of thinking because it was
right,
a lot. And so it's interesting now as we're talking about this, how there was always that positive end result that we envisioned for our children. And now, I mean, they're 14 now and they're doing great. And we also had a son. We had three kids under 2 years. And so that in itself was a lot.
mhm,
So a few years passed. Once I hit the survival mode, that breaking point, it was interesting because I looked back and I told my husband, everything that we have focused on for our children, the life that we want for our children, everything
mhm,
has been working out. What would
mhm,
happen if we adopted that same mindset and shifted it for our personal, um, for ourselves personally?
yes,
And that
yes,
right there was a game changer, absolute game changer, because it's like, some people call it manifestation, right? Others call it miracles. Call it whatever you want to call it. But I sat there and I said, all these things that we've desired for our children, especially our daughters with so many needs at that time. I said, everything's been working out.
mhm,
Despite what everyone has told us, it's
mhm,
working.
mhm,
What if we have proof that we can do it. Now let's
yes,
adopt it to ourselves. And
yes,
it was a game changer. It changed my
I
life
love it.
personally when I shifted it. I mean, there's proof already. So
Yeah.
shift it from one area of your life to the next.
Mhm. That's lovely. And how gorgeous is it to that parental instinct that you had while they were in the womb, which then transferred to who and how you parented when they were out of the womb. That powerful rewiring that happens, right? When we have the gift of becoming parents. How lovely that the revelation then continued to you, because you could not be more beloved if you tried, Chris, right? Like like you have been loved since the moment that you were conceived, right? And like that same love that rewired you as a parent and transferring that back to yourself, that's exactly the gift of mental fitness and future flourishing, and living into a world where we allow ourselves to be washed over and um, use the thoughts to transform into aligned action, so that the aligned action brings about our well-being, our flourishing, and the flourishing of every relationship we're in touch with. Powerful. Hmm.
Yes. Now, I mean, we're here, we're having this conversation. You mentioned, we're here, we're having a human experience, right? And
Yeah.
there's so many things that impact our day-to-day lives. So, how can us here as humans stop looping on the negative, spiral that or that can be like reactive all the time? Just
Yes.
so easy to get
Yes.
stuck in there.
Okay. So this actually taps into what you did in your pregnancy, which is to opt out of the thoughts that want to keep us looping. So here's what I mean by that. Um, a couple of years ago, I was driving with some colleagues between Wyoming and Colorado, and we were on a road trip. And I picked up one colleague in the town that I live in, and then we were going to pick up another colleague in Fort Collins, and then we were headed to Colorado Springs. And the Collins colleague was asking me about the Google Maps route that I had between there and Colorado Springs. And I was like, I don't know, it's Google Maps, it's fine, like we'll get there in time. And he like looked at it and he was like, hey, this route is weird. Like, I don't know why you're going on this route. And I was like, it's fine, we'll get there in time. We didn't really have a time crunch. So we got there when we got there. Way back when we were dropping him off after 3 days in Colorado Springs, it was the same conversation. And got back to Casper and I was like, hey, talking to my husband, I was like, hey, my Google Maps app is consistently giving me a different drive time than anybody I ever travel with. What's up with that? And he was like, have you checked your settings? And I was like, no, haven't checked my settings. Checked my settings. My settings were set to avoid highways.
Oh,
And they were set like that for over 2 years that it had been like this. And I had never thought to check the settings before. So this is exactly the exact same thing that we're being invited to do with your question and with mental fitness, right? Is to check the settings of, are we listening to fear brain? Because
mm.
we can click off listen to fear brain and click on listen to love brain, listen to sage brain, listen to thrive brain. This is how we unloop ourselves. So like if we're stuck on the treadmill of hypervigilance or judgment or control or avoidance, whatever our typical pattern is, we can literally look at the treadmill and we can say, not today. I'm stepping off of you and I'm going to step onto the treadmill that has me looping in wellness and flourishing and wholeness and possibility and strength and courage and compassion and all of the things that we want to be in the world. And so that stop the looping thing is really, it hinges on what I like to call the 1% game, which is if today I tell the hypervigilant loop, I'm not going to get on you today, then tomorrow I have 1% history behind me to do it again. And then on day 3, I have 2% history behind me to do it again. And then on day 4, I have 3% history behind me to do it again. Right. And so it's that muscle thing again. It's the habit thing again, but it's micro habits because the brain will try to convince us that it's all or nothing. And that if we don't completely get off the hypervigilant loop, then we're a bad person. No, like survival brain, we think survival brain. Survival brain got us here. It protects us, it keeps us safe. And we are in control over those looping thoughts and patterns. We have the choice to quiet them and bring them back from overcranked down into a manageable level.
Yeah. Okay. So last thing I want to ask you, because I know this conversation can go on forever because I'm loving it. Tell me about the stop, drop, and roll for brains on fire. That
Heck
really caught my
yeah.
attention from your work.
Of course. Yes. This is such a lovely, accessible mindset practice that we can get to any time of day, any time of night. So, in the same way that the fire department used to tell us, if your clothes are on fire, you need to stop, drop, and roll in order to put out the fire.
Mhm.
The stop, drop, and roll of mental fitness is pause, adjust, and pull. So here's what I mean. When hard thought, scary thought, negative thought comes in, we pause, we intercept it, we see it for what it is. And sometimes we need to call it what it is, which is a liar. So sometimes we need to say to the thought that says, I'm really bad at fill in the blank. We say to that thought, I'm going to let you pass. I opt out of you. I'm going to pause. And then we're going to adjust the volume. So this is all about, it's like the Pixar movie Inside Out, right?
Mhm.
We're going to sit at the command center of our brain, and we're going to say to anxiety or anger or sadness or whatever emotion is peaked at the moment, we're going to dial it down. We're going to adjust the volume control. And then we're going to pull, i.e., the tug of war or the door analogy. We're going to pull with sage brain rather than allowing our bully brain, our fear brain to push against us. So the stop, drop, and roll of mental fitness is pause, adjust, and pull. Those are the three motions that we go through when our brain is on fire with a negative emotion.
I love the inside out analogy of being in the commander center. I love it. That just, it's kind of
Mhm.
like, if for anyone who has watched the movie, obviously makes it so easy. That to
Yeah.
me just made it so easy. Like, wait a minute, let me tune you down a little bit. Let me listen up
Yeah.
to you over here a little bit. And I'm in control the entire time. Like
Yes.
I'm controlling the everything.
Yes, and to that I would add equilibrium, okay? So in Inside Out, do any of those characters get banished? No. They're all still there. They're all still at the control. Anger is still there, sadness is still there, anxiety is still there in the second movie. All of them are there, but it's about equilibrium. So when anxiety is overcranked, we can't hear ourselves. When anger is overcranked, we can't hear ourselves. When sadness is too loud, we can't hear ourselves. So we bring it back into equilibrium where all of it belongs, because this is not
Mhm.
about banishing parts of ourselves. Every single part of ourselves, survival brain included, it belongs. And so in mental fitness, then when we pause, adjust, and pull, we get it all back into equilibrium. So we're all rowing in the same direction again.
Oh gosh, I love it. Thank you for that analogy. I mean, even though I've seen the movie, I think it's just going to make it super easy for me to just bring that in. It's like, okay, let me just tune in. I'm in the command center. Let me just tune in, fine tune to what's calling me at the moment.
Great. I'm so glad it landed. Of
Yeah, sometimes it's just the easiest, simple analogies that make things just click, right? And actually,
course.
that makes it easy to also share with children.
Mhm,
So
mhm. They
thank
get
you.
they get it instinctually, of course. Mhm.
Yeah. Libby, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and all your knowledge. I could just sit here and chat with you for a while. And I'm actually excited that we get to hear from you and learn more from you as our guest expert inside the community. So thank you for that. You are
Mm.
scheduled for February. I'm not quite sure if this episode is going to come out before or after, but for those of you that are tuning in, please check out Libby and all her work. And if this conversation resonated with you, if you want to tune in to more of her work, you can find her inside the community. And Libby, tell us how they can directly get in contact with you as well.
Of course, absolutely. So, probably the simplest way to get in touch with me would be through, I mean, I'm on all of the socials, but you can come find me on my website, which is resonatenow.live. Um, and then I'm the Human Resonator on Instagram and on Substack, and you can come find me there. And one of my best free resources that is available to anybody that's intrigued by this, whether or not you want to continue the mental fitness work or not, this free resource is called the Free Saboteur Discovery Session. And you can click on that from my website. It's like the top button on the website, and you can go get signed up for a free Saboteur Discovery Session. And in that session, you take the assessment, and we for about 45 minutes we sit down together and we really look at how those patterns are affecting you and how you can connect with that true inner beloved voice in order to come back into control again.
I love it. We'll make sure to get all your links from you, Libby, so we can put them in the description. And I love what you do. I'm going to continue to follow your work and excited to continue to share it here with our members inside the Soul Line Network. For everyone else, thank you for being here. And we will see you next time on our next episode inside the private podcast of the Soul Line Network. Until next time, goodbye.